What is your plea to count 1, first-degree reckless homicide?
I plead guilty.
I have called for Jacarie. You always had an excuse when all you had to do was bring me my son.
At 6:15 p.m., police were dispatched to 4160 North Elmhurst Road in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, for what was reported as a dead on entry complaint. The initial report indicated that a 12-year-old boy had been found inside the residence, already in an advanced state of decomposition. Police arrived at the grey brick residence immediately began securing the scene. Their first priority was to clear the home and ensure there was no additional victims or ongoing threats within. What they would find inside would shock even these experienced law enforcement professionals. The victim was 12-year-old Jacarie Robinson. He was born August 19, 2011. His father, Romuan Moye, was the primary caregiver. He is also the suspect in what would become a homicide investigation. The person who discovered Jacarie's body was his own older half-brother. His name is JM. He was 22 years old. His name has been redacted, so I'll call him JM. He had been growing increasingly concerned about his father's evasive behavior. JM provided officers with a detailed account of the events leading up to the grim discovery. According to JM's statement to Officer Michael, Roman had 3 children who historically lived with him. Their names have been redacted, but you had BR, who was born in 2006, you had SR, born in 2008, and then the victim, Jacarie Robinson. And for at least 2 weeks prior to October 10th, BR and CR had been staying with their mother, Yalorn, leaving only Jacarie in his father's sole care. Now, 4 to 5 days before finding his brother's body, JM had stopped by his father's residence for a visit. This entire interaction took place outside. JM never entered the home. He never saw Jacarie. Now, during that visit, JM noticed that his father was acting weird. He was acting strange, repeatedly taking deep breaths in an abnormal manner. Concerned, JM asked his father to stay in contact with him. After that visit, JM continued exchanging text messages with Roman. You see his younger siblings, BR and SR, who wanted to return home to their father's residence. Now on October 8, 2023, JM attempted to drop them off, but then Roman told JM it was okay to bring them over. But when JM actually arrived, Moye suddenly texted back claiming he wasn't home. JM was confused. You told me I can bring them. When I bring him over, where are you? This was the second time he had come to the residence, only to have his father refuse to answer the door. And by October 10th, JM's concern had escalated into alarm. He went to the residence specifically to check on his father's well-being. He knocked on the front door and called out, "Dad, if you're in there, please come out, please come out." When no one answered, JM made the decision to enter the residence. And then the moment he stepped inside, JM was struck by an overwhelming odor. He searched through the residence once, finding no one. Something compelled him to go to the home a second time. As he entered the living room, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. He saw a human foot, and it was sticking out from covers on the room floor. JM pulled over the covering and saw a face that had been ravaged by decomposition. And despite the condition of the boy, JM immediately recognized his little brother, Jacarie. In his statement to police, JM described feeling lost and confused, adding, "I don't even know how to fucking feel right now." He appeared to be in profound shock. Imagine that. You're 20-something years old, you know your father's a bit crackers, you go into the house, and then you find your younger brother dead. Wow. In a more detailed statement to Officer Theodore Chandler, JM provided crucial background information about Jacarie's life. In the months before his death, the picture that emerged was one of increasing isolation and concerning physical decline. According to JM, Roman had disclosed a cancer diagnosis a few years earlier, and for the past month, Roman had been claiming the cancer had progressed and he did not have long to live. This prompted JM to try spending more time with his father, but Roman had become increasingly evasive, culminating in the bizarre incident where he claimed not to be home when JM arrived to drop his other siblings off. JM revealed that his father had been keeping Jacarie away from the rest of the family for the past several months. During that time, Roman reported Jacarie was acting really bad, while he would allow BR and SR to leave the residence to visit JM. However, Roman would never let Jacarie go anywhere. On the rare occasion JM did see Jacarie, he was alarmed by the boy's appearance. Jacarie was extremely skinny. Now, the last time JM recalled seeing Jacarie was on August 19th, 2023, Jacarie's 12th birthday. JM remembered thinking, damn, what the fuck is Jacarie eating? When JM saw Jacarie, the boy often appeared sullen. JM would ask if he was okay, and Jacarie would respond, no. JM noted that a little kid should be happy, but for the past few months, Jacarie never was. JM himself described his father as a harsh punisher, whose punishments would often last for a week, though he noted that physical punishment wasn't frequent. Now, Roman's mother and Jacarie's grandmother arrived at the residence after receiving a frantic call from JM. Detective Brian interviewed her. The grandmother reported she hadn't seen Jacarie for 6 years. I barely have 6 friends. Anyone that I haven't seen for 6 years, I don't consider a friend, I don't consider a family member. Imagine not seeing your grandchild or the grandchild not seeing the grandmother for 6 years. What the hell? She also said she hadn't been inside her son's residence in 3 years, that being Roman. She revealed Roman had told her about a cancer diagnosis 2 years prior, though she expressed uncertainty about whether she actually believed he had cancer. Earlier that same day, at 3 p.m., the grandmother had spoken with Roman by phone and asked about Jacarie. Roman told her Jacarie was fine. Just hours later, the boy's body would be discovered. And after learning of Jacarie's death, the grandmother engaged in a revealing text message with her son, Roman. She texted him saying, "You may as well turn yourself in. You're going to prison for life." He responded, "Your son is dying. I won't be around for that." She says, "Turn yourself in now. You're still living." Now Yolone, the mother of Jacarie, was also interviewed by Detective Justin. SR and BR had been living with her for the past 2 weeks. Shockingly, Yolone hadn't seen Jacarie in 3 years. What the hell is going on? The mother of the child, who's looking after the other siblings, has not seen her youngest son for more than 3 years. Yes, I know. Roman is a piece of shit. But Yolone, where the fuck were you? What were you doing? Twiddling your thumbs? Scratching your ass? What were you doing? She did report that she had spoken to him on the phone periodically, the last being 5 weeks before his death. Yolone revealed that Roman had told her multiple times over the preceding weeks Jacarie was misbehaving and stealing food. How do you steal food in your own house? And because of this, he put the boy on punishment. Roman would only allow SR and BR to visit their mother, never Jacarie. Jacarie always stayed home. And now on October 10th at 3 p.m., Yolone had sent Roman a text message asking to see Jacarie. He never responded. During her interview with Detective Solovsky, Yolone was shaking and crying. Now, Detective Michael conducted a thorough investigation of the residence. What he found inside was a scene of shocking neglect and squalor. The front door was stuck shut with a doorknob that didn't work. The primary entrance was a side door on the south side of the 2-story single-family home. Upon entering, investigators were hit with an overwhelming smell of mold, feces, and decay. The kitchen had a large pile of garbage in the center of the floor. The kitchen table was buried under trash. How is a table buried under trash? How high is the trash, huh? The sink was covered in mold, and molded food sat on the counters. The fridge appeared functional, but was filled with spoiled, molded food. The bathroom was filled with garbage, and the toilet was overflown with human feces. Both the vanity sink and shower were covered in mold. In the living room where Jacarie's body was found, the thermostat read 64 degrees. That is cold. The heat worked but hadn't been turned on. On a coffee table, surrounded by numerous televisions, investigators found several plastic bottles filled with urine. Was he forcing the boy to take a piss in a bottle, or was he pissing in a bottle himself? Roman, what on earth were you playing at? Jacarie's body lay on the floor in the front of the couch. wrapped in a blue blanket with a torn white t-shirt covering his head. The boy appeared extremely malnourished. Maggots covered his face and mouth. There must have been... Wow. Imagine maggots going through his eyes, coming out his nose. Wow. Now, detectives Paul Miner and Matthew Buman located and interviewed BR and SR. SR told Detective Miner that she, BR, and Jacarie were homeschooled by their father. She described how Roman would punish Jacarie for stealing food, saying he would whoop him. At night, Jacarie would sneak into the kitchen to steal food, a desperate act that suggested he wasn't being adequately fed. SR and BR hadn't been home for 2 weeks because their father said he needed to take care of something. Now, text messages on SR's phone revealed that she had warned her father that their mother was going to call the police because he wouldn't let anyone see Jacarie. BR provided a similar account, explaining Jacarie was constantly in trouble for misbehaving. BR last saw Jacarie 2 weeks before his death and noted that the boy wasn't eating and was sleeping excessively. And BR explained Jacarie couldn't go and stay with their mother because he was grounded. Now, October 11th, 2023, Dr. Lauren Decker, a medical examiner, performed an autopsy on Jacarie's body. Her findings were deeply disturbing. He had a fractured right humerus, a callous bone formation, which meant that the injury was actually healing, meaning he had it for a while. The doctor noted the fracture was unusually large with an irregular pattern. The left humerus also appeared to be fractured. The right 7th and 10th posterior rib showed callus formation, consistent with healing fractures, evidence of previous trauma. The body was extremely malnourished and emaciated with moderate decomposition. During the autopsy, the 12-year-old weighed 54 pounds, a shockingly low weight. But the physical evidence painted a clear picture of prolonged neglect, starvation, and mistreatment. Roman was then arrested and charged with his death. To conclude on this story, I'm going to go on to another story. But what happened next after this makes my piss boil. Because when he went to court, they gave him a plea deal, he pled guilty, and he's sentenced to 47 years. Now, how on earth, think about this for a second. He tortured this child, starved the child. I think he hated the child, and because the child was the youngest, he saw the child as the weakest, so he took out all his anger on the child. To me, that's a psychology. But how do you do all of that? And then in the end, you can say, yeah, I was guilty, quick trial, and he go to prison. Someone like this, you know what they should be? A public inquiry. He should sit in front of the rest of his family and answer every single question they ask him. He has a duty to explain his actions. There's no cancer diagnosis that justifies what he did. Maggots on the boy. This is one of the most disgusting cases I've ever covered. And of course, 47 years is a long time in prison. He'll never get out. But that is nowhere near enough what this boy suffered. So, moving on, this is the tragic case of Angel Holland and Aaron Stalling. These two individuals were accused of starving and severely neglecting their 3 young children. Angel Holland, a 28-year-old mother, and Aaron Stalling, her 30-year-old boyfriend, shared a home in Cincinnati. The couple had 3 children, aged 6, 8, and 9, who were entrusted to their care. The children were homeschooled, and for some time, their parents maintained a facade of normalcy, until authorities received a tip that raised alarming bells. Further investigation revealed disturbing reports from teachers and neighbors. The children had been seen looking malnourished, weak, and unkempt, with some neighbors raising concerns about their weight and health. Despite these signs, no immediate action was taken, until a 911 call that changed everything. So, September 2025, Angel Holland called 911 saying her 9-year-old had trouble breathing. When responders entered the house, what they discovered was horrific. The emergency medical team found the boy barely conscious. He was weighing only 30 pounds, roughly a third of a healthy weight for a child his age. His skin was pale, his bones protruded, and he was severely dehydrated. The child was hospitalized and a life hanging in the balance. In that moment, the horrifying extent of neglect was exposed. Not just starvation, but months, possibly years, of mistreatment. The other 2 children, aged 6 and 8, were found in the house in similar condition, emaciated, suffering from malnutrition with signs of neglect. The house itself was in a state of disarray, filthy and filled with trash, human waste and mold. The conditions were so bad that authorities immediately removed the children from the house and placed them in protective custody. After the children were taken into custody, investigators uncovered a pattern of neglect. Both Angel and Aaron were promptly arrested. They were charged with multiple counts of child endangerment, felonious assault, and child mistreatment. These charges detailed how the couple had failed to provide basic necessities. They weren't given food, there was no medical care, and a safe environment for the children it was not. In court, prosecutors laid out the horrific evidence. The children had been deprived of proper nutrition, hidden wounds found on their bodies suggested ongoing physical mistreatment, and their extreme malnutrition likely contributed to life-threatening health complications. This judge called the case one of the worst she had ever seen, describing the neglect as symptomatic and unconscionable. Both Holland and Stalling faced numerous charges, including assault resulting in serious injury, child endangerment, and neglect. The identity of the children remained protected, but their suffering was undeniable and heartbreaking. Throughout 2025, both defendants appeared in court multiple times. Their attorneys argued various points, some claiming they were overwhelmed and unaware of the extent of the children's suffering. You know, that would only be true if you're thick as pig shit. If you're going to go to court and you're going to say, I did not realize. That's what they're saying, right? They're saying, oh, I didn't know. Then you're just confirming you are thick as pig shit. You have a fucking chicken in your brain. Chicken brain. Ultimately, prosecutors argued that the evidence proved a pattern of neglect. In October 2025, Aaron and Angel pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts, including child neglect, endangering the welfare of a child. The judge handed down a sentence of 25 years in prison for each to run concurrently, sending a clear message that such blatant neglect and abuse would not be tolerated. Again, that's just disgusting. How do you do that and then go to court and then say, oh, I was guilty, please take me to jail? Like, you know how you used to have public executions back in the day? Obviously, I'm not for that. I am for public hearings though, you know? Hearings are public, I know. I'm talking about the family, right, should be able to sit in front of the suspect and ask him every question they want. 25 years is barely a drop in a bucket, if you ask me. Now my final case. Now, the victim is Constantine Alexander Washburn. This took place in West Virginia. Now, I've had this case for a while, and I cannot find any images of anyone anywhere. I've contacted the police, they told me to F off. I contacted the court, they told me to F off more, and nobody knows this story. No YouTubers covered this case. There's only one article online that I can't read because it's behind a paywall, and the court document is the only way we know the life of Constantine Alexander Washburn. But again, I did find this one image. So keep in mind, that's the only image in this case. But his story must be told. He was a 22-month-old boy who died May 31st, 2008. He had severe brain trauma. But here's what makes this case troubling. The state openly admitted throughout the legal process they did not know who actually did this to the child. Yet Alex's mother was arrested and charged and ultimately convicted of the death. But our story begins May 29th, 2008 in Charleston, West Virginia. You guys ever been to Charleston, by the way? Brilliant city. It was a Thursday evening and emergency services received a 911 call. When paramedics arrived, they found a 22-month-old boy, Alex Washburn, who was completely unconscious. He wasn't responding and in critical condition. The paramedics immediately noticed something alarming. The child, he's not just sick, he's covered in marks on his forehead, his chin, his arm, his legs, and his back. His forehead is noticeably swollen and he's completely limp, making no sounds, not crying, showing no response to stimuli whatsoever. The emergency medical team sprung into action. They worked to stabilize Alex for transport, placing an oxygen mask on his face, starting an IV, monitoring his vital signs. Albert LaRue, one of the EMT, he carried the unconscious child to the ambulance, noting a large, obvious bruise on the boy's forehead. Another EMT, James Thompson, assisted with the equipment, carefully positioning Alex's airway. They inserted a nasogastric tube through his mouth and nose into his stomach to reduce the risk of aspiration. Now present at the scene were Alex's parents. You had his mother, Elizabeth Thornton, and his father, Christopher Washburn. I have no images of Christopher, unfortunately. Both parents were in the ambulance to the Charleston Area Medical Center. According to the critical care transport nurse, Lakin Southall, the mother didn't say anything during the ride while the father was talking on his phone. Meanwhile, back at the apartment complex, a sheriff's deputy named Jeffrey Meadows is questioning witnesses trying to piece together what happened. The parents tell him Alex had been eating chicken broth at the kitchen table when his breathing suddenly became labored and he became unresponsive and limp. Oh, yes, that good old-fashioned poisoned chicken broth did this. Muppets. They explain Alex had been sick for 4 to 5 days, and what they thought was a virus with vomiting, diarrhea, the whole works. The mother had wanted to take him to the hospital, but they didn't have transportation. The paramedics and emergency personnel are professional, but they were troubled. The explanations they heard from the parents were like, eh? They didn't seem to match up with what they were seeing on the child's body. When Alex arrived at the hospital, the medical team immediately recognized the severity of his condition. Dr. Gillian McCagg, a third-year surgical resident, examined the unconscious child and found extensive injuries. There are bruises along his forehead and jawline, swelling of the forehead, bruising on his arms, leg, back, and sides. Alex is intubated, meaning a tube has been inserted down his throat to help him breathe, and he's completely unresponsive to any stimuli. Chicken broth, you say? Bollocks. The medical team performed emergency procedures. They drill into Alex's skull to place an intracranial pressure monitor. This is a device that measures the pressure building up inside the brain. This is a critical procedure for severe head injuries. What they find is alarming, and during the procedure, there was an ominous sign. Dr. McCagg is so concerned by what she sees, she contacts CPS. This detail will become important later in the trial. Neurosurgeon Dr. John Schmidt is called in to treat Alex. He finds blood on the surface of the child's brain and in the spinal fluid surrounding the brain. These findings were consistent with a severe head injury. When Dr. Schmidt spoke to the parents about what happened, they told him that 3 or 4 days earlier, Alex had fallen against a coffee table and later had fallen against a bathroom sink or toilet. What, did he slip on the chicken broth? But Dr. Schmidt didn't buy this. Yeah, because he's not stupid. In his medical opinion, these injuries are not consistent with random accidental falls. He testified that while toddlers do fall frequently, this is just what toddlers do. They don't suffer the kind of severe brain swelling he's seeing in Alex. This injury, he believed, was caused by what he called some sort of severe exchange of energy between the victim and his environment. In other words, one of the parents did this. Dr. Muna Chabib, a pediatric critical care doctor, also treated Alex. She reviewed his CT scan, which shows an acute bleed on the left side of his brain, meaning it happened recently within the last few days at most. She spoke to both parents, and both tell her the same story about the coffee table. Like Dr. Schmidt, Shabib finds this explanation inconsistent with her clinical observations. The injuries are simply too severe for a fall, and there's the crucial point that Dr. Shabib emphasizes, because based on the severity of Alex's head injury, his caregivers would have had very little doubt something serious was wrong with the child. The symptoms of such a severe head injury, lethargy, unresponsiveness, lack of interest in surroundings, nausea and vomiting, would have been obvious and alarming, not easily confused with flu-like symptoms. When asked if earlier medical treatment could have saved Alex's life, the doctor said yes, if Alex had been brought to the hospital earlier, he could have been saved. But by the time they called 911, it was way too late. And despite the team's medical efforts, Alex never regained consciousness. 2 days after arriving at the hospital, Alex Washburn dies. So now the investigation begins, and this is where the case becomes complex. Because here's the problem facing the police. They know the child died from head trauma. They know the injuries are inconsistent with a fall, but they don't know who did this. Both parents had access to the child during the relevant time period. The state could not prove which parent did this to Alex and caused the brain injury. On June the 5th, 2008, just 5 days after Alex's death, his mother was arrested. The charge is child neglect resulting in death. The state argued that regardless of who hurt Alex, his mother should have sought medical treatment for him earlier, and that this failure to seek medical treatment, this neglect, resulted in his death. Because that's where the case went. They couldn't prove murder, homicide, that the only thing they could go on is not getting treatment quick enough. And that is the responsibility they put on the mother. So the case went before a grand jury in September 2008. The mother is indicted on charges of child neglect resulting in death. Her jury trial was scheduled January 9th, 2009. But before we get to the trial, let me tell you more about the autopsy, because this testimony becomes central to the case. Dr. James Kaplan, the chief medical examiner for the state of West Virginia, performed the autopsy. His ultimate conclusion: Alex died as a consequence of abusive, closed head injury. But let me break down what he found. Firstly, there was a large mark on the middle and right side of Alex's forehead. That shows some signs of healing by the time of the autopsy, suggesting this was not a brand new injury. His opinion was that Alex suffered more than one significant impact to the front of his head. Importantly, the skull wasn't fractured. But there was clear evidence that the child's brain had moved violently inside his skull, causing what's called a subdural hematoma, a collection of blood between the brain and the skull caused by torn blood vessels. When asked whether these injuries could have been consistent with falling onto a coffee table or a slip in the bathroom, Dr. Kaplan said no. In his medical opinion, to a reasonable degree of certainty, these injuries were consistent with a violent assault that caused the boy's brain to slam around inside his skull, tearing blood vessels. See, Kaplan testified that changes in Alex's behavior would have been apparent immediately after the assault, even though death wouldn't have been immediate. The child would likely have become lethargic, had seizures, and appeared limp. He would have been slow or irregular breathing and vomited. The doctor stated the abruptness of these changes would be indicative of a catastrophic assault, not a virus. A reasonable caregiver, he says, would have brought the child to the hospital right away. And then came the key question. If Alex had been taken to the hospital, in his opinion, would he have survived? And the doctor said yes, although he probably would never have been a normal child after the assault, but it's possible he could have lived. This testimony that prompt medical attention could have saved Alex's life became the foundation of the case. Now, the trial began January 9th, 2009, but before testimony even began, there's an important legal issue to address. Prior to the criminal trial, the West Virginia Department of Health had instituted a child abuse and neglect proceeding against both parents, seeking custody of their 3 other children. These civil proceedings involved many of the same witnesses who would testify in the criminal trial. The defense moved to prevent any mention of these proceedings, arguing that they used a different standard of proof and that bringing them up would confuse the jury. No, you muppets, you're pissed off because the jury is going to see, hang about, their other 3 children are doing bad. Who knows what they did to Alex? However, the court did agree to instruct witnesses not to reference the specifics of those proceedings. But during opening statements, the state mentioned that Dr. McCagg called CPS when she saw Alex's injuries. The defense immediately objected and moved for a mistrial, but this motion was denied. Then during her testimony, Dr. McCagg mentions the CPS again. There was another objection from the defense, a motion for a mistrial, but this was denied. Kind of a weird situation though. The judge told the jury, look, ignore this whole CPS stuff. But then when the prosecution mentioned the CPS, or if a witness mentioned the CPS, the defense says objection. And then the objection was overruled, so I don't know. Now, the state built its case through the testimony of all those emergency responders, as well as medical professionals that I mentioned earlier. They established a timeline and a theory. Their theory is that Alex was severely injured several days before and suffered a catastrophic head injury. He exhibited clear symptoms that should have alarmed any reasonable caregiver, and instead of immediately seeking medical help, the parents waited days, during which Alex's condition got worse to the point where he could no longer be saved. Now, the state needed to establish more than just medical testimony. They needed to show what their mother knew and when she knew it. So, Christina Carnell was a longtime friend of Elizabeth. Miss Carnell provided crucial testimony about the incident on the coffee table. She was present when Alex touched his head while spinning around. She said he had a bruise about the size of a penny on his forehead and was vomiting both before and after he touched his head. Critically, she testified that the mother and father discussed taking him to the hospital but were afraid to do so because of the bruise. This testimony is devastating to the defense. It suggests consciousness of guilt and awareness that Alex did need medical attention, but the decision was not to seek it because of fear about how the bruise would be perceived. This is the entire point. The fact that they did not act here is what they're being charged for. Now, Miss Cornell also testified that she was present on Thursday evening, May 29th, when Alex became unconscious. She admits, at the mother's request, she initially lied to paramedics, telling them that she was present when Alex became unconscious and that he had just been drinking broth. Yes, again, that famous poison chicken broth. Now, the mother's own mother, Elizabeth Gerlach, also testified for the state. She says her daughter told her about Alex's fall. She mentioned he was delirious and all he wanted to do was sleep. She testified that she suggested to her daughter that Alex should go to the hospital in case he had a concussion. And because of this, the state had established severe injuries inconsistent with accidents, symptoms that would have been alarming to a caregiver, conversations about going to the hospital, a suggestion from the grandmother to seek medical care, and then finally a decision not to do any of this. Now, at the close of the state's case, the defense moved for a judgment of acquittal, arguing that the state did not present substantial evidence that would justify a guilty verdict. This motion is denied. The judge found there's enough evidence to let the jury decide. Now, regarding the defense's turn, they present a rather different theory. They called Dr. Harold Eugene as an expert witness. Now, the state did object to the qualification of him as an expert, but the court allowed his testimony anyway. He offered a series of alternative explanations for Alex's condition. According to the doctor, based on his review of the medical records, Alex was probably autistic and suffered a vitamin C deficiency. He probably suffered from vaccine-induced encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain caused by routine childhood vaccinations. He theorizes that this encephalitis would have caused an enlarged forehead and a weaker than normal skull structure, making Alex vulnerable to severe injury from relatively minor trauma. In other words, the defense is arguing that what appeared to be a head injury could have been pre-existing medical condition. This would have made Alex's skull abnormally fragile, allowing a simple fall against the coffee table to cause injury. The state was then allowed to cross-examine the doctor. The defense also presented testimony from neighbors who saw Alex during the week. Bobby Oliver testified that she babysat Alex on Saturday and saw him with what she thought was a virus. He had diarrhea, he wasn't feeling well. On Monday, she saw him with a small bump on his forehead, but he was behaving normally and playing. On Tuesday, he still had diarrhea, but wasn't vomiting. On Wednesday evening, he was responsive and interactive, and became upset when he couldn't go to church with her. On Thursday morning, she saw him awake and responsive on the couch, and overheard the parents discussing whether to take him to the doctor because they feared dehydration. Another neighbor, Wendy Pauley, told a similar story. She saw Alex on Tuesday morning lying on the couch. He was awake, but not feeling well. He had a bruise on his head. She did suggest to the parents take him to the doctor, but they didn't. On Wednesday night, she saw him in his crib jumping and seemed happy. And then the next time she saw him was Thursday afternoon when CPR was being administered. This testimony is meant to show that Alex's symptoms were consistent with the virus and that his behavior remained relatively normal, contradicting the state's theory that he would have been violently assaulted by his parents. But then came the most critical moment of the trial. The mother, Elizabeth Thornton, took the stand. She denies any knowledge of who inflicted injuries on Alex. She testified she did not harm her child. She did not see any urgent medical need that required before she called 911. And then when she went through the final week of his life with the jury, she said Alex got sick on Saturday and they thought it was a virus, the same virus that had affected her other children. She had even taken one of the older children to urgent care for poison ivy treatment around this time and was told to keep them hydrated. On Monday, May 27th, Alex was still experiencing diarrhea and vomiting while watching videos with his siblings. He began spinning around and struck his forehead on the corner of the coffee table. He cried, she comforted him, and shortly afterward, he was playing normally. That night, after the father came home, they discovered Alex had vomited, so they bathed him. While in the tub, he slipped and fell, striking his chin on the toilet. But there was only a small mark. On Tuesday, Alex didn't want to eat but was feeling better than Monday. She saw only a bruise on his forehead and a small mark on his chin. On Wednesday, she worked, leaving Alex with Christina Carnell. When she returned in the evening, the children were fine. Alex ate tacos and acted normally. She did not recall vomiting or diarrhea that day. On the Thursday morning, she didn't work. Alex wasn't awake when she got up around 10:30. When he was awake, she gave him a cereal and a granola bar he wasn't interested in eating. She changed him and they watched TV. She left the apartment to visit a neighbor for about 45 minutes, leaving Alex with the father. After returning, Alex refused lunch but took Pedialyte. He was unusually inactive, he took a nap and woke up around 6. She grew worried about his dehydration. The father walked to the store for flavored Pedialyte. She tried feeding Alex chicken noodle soup while he sat upright on the couch, but he wasn't interested. Then his breathing became labored, his eyes rolled backward. She directed her friend to call 911 and she began CPR. She accompanied the father to the hospital and told medical personnel Alex had been sick, he's dehydrated and had fallen. Critically, she denies telling anyone that she was afraid to take Alex for treatment. It took them 10 hours. This is a long deliberation, suggesting the jury struggled with the decision. For them, the case was circumstantial. The state did admit they have no idea who hurt Alex, but they've argued that it doesn't matter. What matters is that he did not get the help. And because he did not get the help, someone must be punished. So the jury returned a verdict guilty of child neglect causing death. The mother was sentenced to 3 to 15 years in prison. She has since been released. I know that case was a bit weird. There wasn't that much information, there's not that many images, you can't quite visualize it. But at least now we know Alex's life. At least we know he existed. It's a shame we won't know anymore. Comment, tell me what you think.